Hey everyone, this is Douglas Robinson, and in this video we're going to walk through building a new module in Sharewell for a map. Now this new module is going to be for, go ahead and open up my administrator tool. This is going to be for tracking subscribers or people who have reviewed a knowledge article on a given team. So if you're new to Sharewell or ITIL, you have a concept of knowledge management where you want to be able to document processes and how-tos and important information. So there's a table for that called knowledge articles, and there's a ITIL process for that called knowledge management, where you can basically store information like, hey, here's how you set up a printer on your machine, here's how you reset passwords in the system, basically any important information that someone might need. So within the out-of-the-box content, I'm on Sharewell version 9.1 here. Really, if you're on version, I think 5 to 8, you probably have this content right here, where you've got an embedded form in the center here, some banners. It kind of follows the consistency of the rest of the objects in the system, whereas the main article content and details are going to be a giant solution or workaround field, a title, some keywords, if service, category, subcategory, and article type and domain. And once the article has been published, this swaps this screen for this one that shows the title in a label and then all of the article content there. So that's what that embedded form there does. What we're going to do is we're going to give the user an ability to say, I have read this knowledge article and I understand it, and I no longer need to see this knowledge article necessarily in day-to-day operations. The goal will be that you can present to your users on a team, here's the knowledge on our team that's being submitted that you have not seen yet. So if one of your team members creates an important process, it shows up. Ideally, this is on your dashboard. You have a dashboard widget, ideally, that's the goal of this, that shows you things that your team members are working on that you should be aware of, that you know that you haven't looked at yet because you haven't marked them off as having been reviewed by you. So that's what we're doing in this video. What we're going to do for this is we're going to create a new supporting business object in Sharewell. So this is also going to be a good video that'll cover the beginning to the end of a new supporting object that lives as a member of a larger parent business object. So to do that, and just to really emphasize what this is going to look like on Knowledge Article, when we look at the form arrangement and there's tabs, approvals are a supporting business object. Journals are a supporting business object, or comments. Problem is not. Problem is a linked major business object where there's one of them. But journals, for instance, what we're going to have here is going to be a tab that'll show users that have reviewed this knowledge article, and that's what it'll be. There'll be a button here that'll automate filling out that tab, and if there's a record there, then you've reviewed this knowledge article, we'll search for it, yada yada. And so that's what a supporting object is generally it lives underneath a parent business object, and is only within the scope of that parent business object. It supports it. If you're wondering why I'm going to these basic level explanations, I'm trying to make my content more user-friendly. It has been pointed out to me that I don't have quite as many training videos as I should, so I'm working on that. So our new business object, we're going to name this knowledge reviewed. We'll give it a better name than that. We'll just say knowledge reviewed by. It does not have to be super descriptive. We don't need this in table management or necessarily need one-steps or search manager or anything for this supporting object. We don't really need to track an owner for this. If you're new to tracking, there are fields that automatically get generated to capture owner, team owner, modified by, created date, time, things like that. That's where these automatic fields come from. And then we're going to add fields for reviewed by name. That can be 100 characters. reviewed by ID potentially. That could be 42 characters. This one we're not going to use immediately because name should be sufficient. That should really be it. You need a parent rec ID, and that's 42 digits. That covers the internal record ID of the knowledge article that this will be linked to. So after you have your fields here, generally, you're going to need a form. There's a button here where you can automatically generate a form. Now, typically, in older content, you would select the theme for professional gray. I think there's a different theme in use in the newer Sharewell version 9.7 or 9.6 content where it's all vertically laid out, but I don't have that off the top of my head. So here we have reviewed by name. I don't think we need anything else. The knowledge article parent rec ID will get stored here. You could also optionally add the knowledge article ID, even though you won't need it. It makes this the public ID, the knowledge article, the 5-digit number, it makes this form look more useful in that you'd be able to look at this record on its own and visually see which article this linked to in case you for some reason had to troubleshoot this, which doesn't really apply here, but it's good practice. If you were building out another object, generally if you're linking to it, like internal rec IDs are not super useful. If you ever foresee yourself having to go here, you would want that. Next, we're going to build a grid. A grid is going to be which columns show up when you search for this record or when you view it in a tab. So we'll add reviewed by name here and potentially knowledge article ID, and that's the public ID, the 5-digit number that identifies that knowledge article. This can be shorter. There we go. So next, we need to link this to knowledge articles. We need a relationship from the knowledge article to this new object. So you'll see there I do that by selecting knowledge article, edit relationships. I'm going to add a new one. Now knowledge article is going to own this supporting object. Supporting objects are usually owned by their parent. If you're new to this screen on relationships, relationship types are pretty simple. They can be hard to remember, but basically a link is generally read-only. When you link two things in Sharewell, you're trying to load something for data usage. When you own something in Sharewell, you're generally creating the thing that you own and you're modifying it and it belongs to the record that owns it. So we're going to say knowledge article owns reviewed by history. So this is going to own many of those records of who's reviewed the knowledge article. There it is. And our links here, you could do a couple of things. The default option, you can say we're storing the key, which is the rec ID for knowledge article, in knowledge reviewed by user. That's an easy way of doing that. We want additional fields to be populated, so we're going to select Setup Custom Link. Someone asked me an interesting question the other day, which was, if you see a relationship where Setup Custom Link is selected, does that mean someone has then customized that relationship after the system was initially set up out of the box? No. Custom link basically means you're using constraints where you can search for any string value being compared to any other string or not string, but date time or any other value other than the key or the rec ID being compared to any other value. So here we're going to check up there, that default link, it basically checks whether the rec ID or not the rec ID, whether the parent rec ID there would be equal to the knowledge article rec ID. We have to do that manually because we are going to be using custom constraints and we're going to use custom auto-population as well. We are going to have this one get auto-populated. Be aware or be wary of this checkbox. If you ever do a links relationship, you probably won't be using this checkbox here because links, again, generally, you're not modifying the child record of the item in the links relationship. So read through that carefully if you're using it. Links, generally, you just kind of load data based on other things. You're not like populating something into the child fields. All right, so auto-populate. And I know I kind of skimmed through that explanation. It deserves a separate video. So auto-populate, this is going to be when this relationship is established, when you're creating a record as a part of this relationship. So when knowledge article creates a new entry saying that it's been reviewed by a user, we were deciding here that we want to populate certain fields. So the fields that we want to populate, and we marked a checkbox for rec ID going into parent rec ID, so that one's done. But if we didn't mark that checkbox, we'd do it here if we needed to. So here we're going to populate knowledge article ID. That's important. That gets set by the knowledge article ID field on the knowledge article table. That should be it for auto-populate. If you wanted to, you could auto-populate the reviewed by user name to the current user, and your action later would just be creating a new record and not filling anything in. Depending on which version of Cherwell you're in, I would say always, always, always uncheck don't load when constraints are blank. There have been some known issues with this checkbox on some previous versions. I don't believe there's really any performance issues to unchecking it. I would just, as a best practice, always uncheck this, unless you hear a good cause to check not loading something when its constraints are blank. So I would uncheck that. Generally, you want relationships to load immediately when you're searching through a record or when you're opening a record. It doesn't matter that much for this one because we're going to be using it for a search query, but may as well. Actually, I'll uncheck that. It doesn't matter that much. The only time you're really going to be seeing that is when you open the tab or when you add something to it. And then finally, the other action here is to add it to our form arrangement. So the form arrangement in Cherwell is the list of tabs that show up at the bottom of the screen when you open a record. And generally, when you add a new relationship, you'll usually see it at the bottom of this list when you first add it. And so here, you can edit relationships and add them from this screen over here. When you need to add a new tab, you drag either the form, because you can add forms under a form arrangement tab. You either drag the form down there or you drag the relationship down there. So we'll add this down here. You'll notice it populates a little tab area on its own. And then we'll right click on the tab to get tab properties. So here we're going to rename this to users that have reviewed this knowledge article. That's all fine. I don't know if I need a specific tab image here or not. Like I don't believe I do. I'm not going to have a new button on this tab. I'm expecting that we'll have a button on the actual form to do this. And when you later get this map, when we create the map, we're not going to include that form. Instead, we'll actually be setting it up to where there's a separate form with a copy of that button that you can position on your own form, because I've noticed most organizations will customize their knowledge form and make changes to it, and we don't want to overwrite those changes. So that's a little bit of best practice for maps later on as well. So we've got a couple of supported views here and buttons that we can configure for this tab. We don't want the new button. We don't need a quick view button in this case, which quick view, if you're not familiar with it, opens a record in a pop-up. That's useful for linked relationships where you have a major object with a lot of stuff. You can configure which views something uses. So for example, you can choose whether it's just a grid, whether it's a grid that also shows a form, whether it's only a form, or whether it's a grid that also shows a form that's split horizontally rather than vertically. In this case, we only need a grid. We shouldn't really have to enter any data, so we're going to leave this as grid as default. That's it for this specific object. We'll click OK. Now we can see these items, we can delete them if we need to, if we have rights, and then the next task is going to be building a one-step that creates one of these entries. So we need, oops, ignore that. We need to go to knowledge article, and let's see, once we're in knowledge article, we're going to global, because then I can test this. And we are going to create a one-step under global. We'll name this Mark Knowledge Article Reviewed by me. And so for this, we're going to create a new child object. And this is going to be a child object for knowledge reviewed by user. We could save it. I'm not going to. If you have required fields and you have actions that save the record automatically, that can become annoying very quickly. We're going to set some fields here. So reviewed by name, this will be the current user's display name. So we're going to use a system function for this. System functions give us a lot of tokens about the current user and other environment settings. Parent rec ID gets auto-populated. Knowledge article ID gets auto-populated. Reviewed by ID, I don't need this, but I will set it just in case I want to use it later. This will get set to current user record ID. Users have rec IDs as well. That's about it. These aren't validated, so regardless of whether you're in the portal or the desktop client, that will get populated without giving you an error. These two get set. That's all we need to do. So now we have a one-step action that actually links you to this knowledge article. I'm going to copy one of these links down at the bottom of the screen and use it to add myself to the knowledge article. And then we can define a search that you can use to find knowledge articles that you haven't reviewed yet. Or filter that by your team, for example. So this link, we need this to go to the one step that we created. This action chooser, this choose action dialog, you'll notice you can get to things like calendars, system commands, dashboards, blah, 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 reports. We're looking at one steps, and we've got Mark knowledge article reviewed by me. Don't disable control just because form is disabled. This is an interesting one. I would leave this one checked because you might not, as a user, you might not have rights to modify this knowledge article depending on your organization, but you probably will have rights to say that you have, what's the word? You probably will have rights to add an entry that you've reviewed that knowledge article. So we'll leave that one enabled. Click OK. And just in case there are weird security permissions, what I'm going to do is we're going to say this one runs as an admin. And I guess I will save it. Because then someone could run this even if they didn't have permissions to, oh, and I should change that label. We want someone to be able to run this even if they don't have permissions to modify the knowledge article. They should be able to say that they reviewed the knowledge article. So Mark article reviewed by me. So this might be annoying if you have a lot of required fields, but it does solve that other potential issue. Now I want to go and apply my changes to this blueprint. On this specific version of Cherwell, some label text edits don't trigger as an actual change. It might not get picked up. My solution for that is to right-click the form, open form properties, click OK, and then the next time you click on the form, magically, you can then apply your form changes back. If that doesn't make sense, if you start noticing some of your changes not getting included in your blueprint files, it might make sense later on. That's only for older versions, though. Okay, so we now have our one step, we have our form update, and I'm going to create a new form as well for the map later on. Mark article reviewed. And what we will do with this is we will just copy that button over here as well, so that when we set up the map for all of this content later, we will actually go and add that to it rather than the default form. All right, so I've pasted this in. It shows up all the way down there. We're going to move that up. And then we'll move that up here. And then we'll dye it black or a different color because it's white right now. Done. So now you have this label. Oh, why is that? Hope this isn't anchored. It's not. Why is this doing this? Oh, I appear to have had two different labels there. That's fine. I copied it twice. Anyways, so now that that's done, when we create a map later, you'll have access to a control here that's already set up to do this action. And as a user that downloads this map, you'll be able to just copy that onto your actual form without us overwriting it. That'll make more sense when we build the map. So next, we're going to create a search for you. So here, I'm going to create a new folder for def edit software, and that is incidents. That explains why there's so many of those. So we'll create a new folder for def edit software, or even just maps. So new articles I haven't reviewed, and this will look for knowledge articles. Let me get rid of that. Where there are no related items. So we're going to look at knowledge article owns reviewed by users. That's the relationship we're querying. This will be a related query that does some kind of comparison on related items of the knowledge article. And we have options here to check that maybe if there are items in that relationship, all of them do something. Is there at least one that has certain criteria? We're looking for knowledge articles where there are no reviewed by users that match our name. And so to do that, we select reviewed by name, and then we compare that to current user display name. That should be all we need for all articles. And then we're going to copy this, and we're going to use it to search articles that belong to our team. There we go, or our teams, I should say. So an easy way to query for articles that belong to one of our teams, instead of checking each team individually, or the current user's default team, is with an ownership clause. So you can select ownership clause here, a little arrow under this new button, and then owner is, we'll select current user, but you can also specify like arbitrary users or teams or the current customer. So current user will say user is a member of the team that owns the record. So basically, if he's a member of any team that owns this record, he will see it. That's an easy way to do that. So there's no articles where it's reviewed by him and he owns it. So now we have two useful searches. We don't necessarily need a dashboard widget as part of the map, so I'm going to go ahead and publish my blueprint. And I'm not going to create an actual blueprint file because I don't really need to. I'm not migrating this between environments. Honestly, so let's talk about blueprint files. All of your changes get merged into blueprint files, and it's good practice to use blueprint files to migrate your changes from dev to test or prod. But what if you don't have a dev or test or prod? What if you have single purpose environments like I do? Um, I being a partner in that instance. Like if you're a consultant, for example, If I am confident that I'm not going to roll something back because this is a demo environment, this is a sandbox, it's not live, there aren't users impacted, do I need a blueprint file? The blueprint file contains the changes, and it might be useful to see what the contents of that blueprint file were. But if you're on Cherwell version 9.1, I think, and higher, it actually stores the blueprint file in the database and will let you download it later on anyways. So at this point, I don't know if you really need to save a blueprint file when you're a consultant working on a single sandbox like this where you don't have multiple environments. If you're doing work for a client, yeah, you need a blueprint file, but what if you're not? Let me sign in. It's a fun rant. Because this here is just, this is an environment that I do just for creating maps and some light work, but it's not a customer environment for that matter. It's mostly demo content. So now, if we're going to test this out, we can look at knowledge articles that we've reviewed. Let me go do that. Under our maps folder, we have articles that I have not reviewed. Now, if I want to, I'll probably get a lot of lists or a lot of items here. We have 347 of them. If you see them displayed like this, you need to go to the View menu and select Results in Grid. And then the first item here is Clear Unsaved Form Entries. Well, I'm going to say I've reviewed this and I no longer need to see it. So we'll mark this as having been reviewed by me. You'll see the form changes a little bit, and now Cherwell admin exists in this list. Now, if I refresh this, I do a little F5, we have 346 instead of 347, and the next one is Modify Form Field Properties. So if this were a dashboard widget of knowledge articles, and, by the way, think of maybe you're a new employee. If this was all knowledge articles with all of your business processes, or if this was all of my team's knowledge articles, and I either need to begin a new role and get up to date with my team or learn things on an ongoing basis, I can now search for knowledge articles either throughout the entire system or articles that belong to my team that I haven't reviewed yet, that I haven't marked, that I understand yet. So there's, I think, tremendous business value in having that there. And with that being said, we're going to map this out so that other people can use it. Oops, I clicked apply when I should have clicked create. And creating the map is easy. So this will be a good demo of, hey, here's how you create a map. Basically you just need to keep a good eye for what you have created and configured that you need to add to the map. So for example, we have a supporting business object, which is knowledge reviewed by a user. We have a wizard for the creating a map. This is a high importance item. You should always select medium or higher importance. I don't know what the point of low importance is when adding a business object. I've never had to add an object to a map that I thought was not critical for the map, but possibly useful. If you have suggestions for what fits this bill, please let me know. So we're going to overwrite all fields. Every field on this object is important. Creating a map, you can choose specific fields to include as part of the map where it doesn't overwrite the entire table, which is really cool. So if you were doing that for an existing object, you would only pick the new fields that you added. We're going to include all default forms for this and the default grid and click finish. There's our table for the knowledge reviewed by a user. Now for knowledge article, we do have things that we're going to piecemeal for the map. So we'll go through here. This one's medium importance. We're not overwriting any fields. We didn't add any fields to knowledge article as part of this map, so we shouldn't be overwriting any fields on this knowledge article. Some of the earlier maps just overwrite a lot of stuff that they don't include or that they don't modify, and that's a bad practice. So for relationships, go ahead and tick do not overwrite any relationships and then select let me choose. That'll uncheck everything. Otherwise, click the little uncheck all box on the left, and then we're selecting the one relationship we created, which is knowledge article owns reviewed by history. We're not overriding default forms only. We're going to choose not the default view form, not the summary, but the KA transfer on map mark article reviewed. That's that mostly blank form that I copied that link button onto. We're not copying or overwriting any grids because you'll have your own. Um, I'm not going to overwrite form arrangement either. When you apply this map, you'll have to rebuild the form arrangement. There is a bug. You don't need actions either. There's a bug on some versions, some earlier versions of Sharewell with creating maps where if you included a form arrangement, even if you only specified that you wanted to include certain tabs, it might include the entire form arrangement and cause issues later where they don't have the items that the tabs refer to. So we're not going to blow away someone's form arrangement. So if you're watching this or if you see the instructions later, it'll probably say go and drag that relationship onto the form arrangement, and there you go. So now that we've added those objects to the map, we need to include our searches. So we'll go select those. Now, in any manager window like this for one-step searches dashboards, you can add items to a map by right-clicking and selecting Add to Map, but you can also set explicit, very granular map options by clicking the button up at the top. If you do this and say Include in Map, you can choose if this already exists, don't overwrite it. If this is not present, import it. You can tell it to remove something or say this is for reference, so only use it if other things need it. Or you can choose to import it based on a condition like a specified feature that can be toggled on and off. We are overwriting these because we created these. And then we need to import the one step that is tied to that button on the knowledge article form. Now, if you're wondering how I'm keeping track of all of these, I don't have a formal system that I'm employing for this project. I just know in my head what I've created, but it might be important for you to write them down. A useful tool might be to check the blueprint contents after you've published blueprints if you saved them, but you should, if you create a lot of maps, figure out how you're going to track what you need to add to them. At this point, I believe we have everything we need for this map because it was pretty simple. So we created a new lookup table, which is users that have reviewed this article. That's this table down here. We've added a relationship from knowledge article, this one here, which is included in this map. We created two searches to find articles that have or don't have items in that relationship. And we created a button that adds a user to that related table. That's it. So now we need to create map properties. For this, we need to name this map. And if you're new to maps, maps are mergeable applications. This is going to be knowledge article reviewed by users list. Crappy name, I know. And for now, I'm just going to copy this into the description. And we'll say that this was created by Def Edit Software LLC. Details URL defeditsoftware.com. And we'll even allow this to be backwards compatible if you're one of the few systems back way far back on like version 5.11 where they enabled maps. And then that's it. Now we can save and we can distribute this map. So we need to go to maps and I need to create myself a folder for knowledge articles reviewed by and then we can name this knowledge articles reviewed by user, save, prepare map for distribution. Sometimes it messes up the directory for the prepared map file here for where it's saving the end result. If you're not familiar with maps, There's a map blueprint which contains the draft of the work that's added here, which you can edit. And then there's a finalized, prepared deployment map file. This can be compressed. I recommend you compress it because they can be quite large, but they cannot be edited from the deployment map file unless you do some tweaking in Notepad. So generally, you want to be able to keep track of both of these files. You distribute the .map or the .mapz file that gets created down here, and you keep this copy up here in case you need to make version 2. And that's it. Our map file is created, and we can now go and shill that map all over our website and our YouTube channel like we're doing right now. It'll probably be a free map. And that's it. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Thanks.